Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. In an earlier episode, we talked about how the film Zeitgeist claimed that Jesus never historically existed because he was a Christianized version of more ancient pagan deities who were said to die and rise from the dead. In that earlier episode, we talked about how mainstream religion scholars, unlike the researchers whose ideas were used in the film, don't even accept the category of dying and rising gods in ancient religions anymore. Their skepticism doesn't stem from a commitment to Christianity, for sure. Rather, the skepticism over the whole category of dying and rising gods stems from the fact that there is no clear ancient text in any ancient Near Eastern religion that predates Christianity that has a dying and rising God for Christians to copy. In this episode, we want to focus on a specific example of this, that is the god Osiris from ancient Egypt. Osiris is in fact one of the main examples Zeitgeist uses to argue that Jesus never actually existed. So let's take a look at the Osiris legend and the New Testament Jesus. You've heard me say it many times, but here on Fringe Pop 321, we insist that primary sources be the basis for claims, and that they must be read in context. So the first question we want to tackle is, who was Osiris? Now, just a few points about Osiris in general before we get to some specifics of the legend. Osiris was the Egyptian lord of the underworld and the judge of the dead. He is easily one of the most important gods of ancient Egypt, and he is the lead character in a myth about the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt and the basis for unified kingship. Now, a few scholars think that there may have been a real person behind the myth, but most Egyptologists don't. The second question we could ask is, what are the sources of the Osiris myth? Well, pyramid text rituals, and these date from the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700 to 2200 BC, are the primary source or a primary source for the Osiris myth. But, to quote J. Gwynne Griffiths, author of the most recent and thorough scholarly study of the Osiris legend, quote, "The early religious texts of Egypt do not present long passages of coherent mythology. Allusions to divine happenings are usually brief, and they are often related to ritual," unquote. Now, translation. The pyramid texts are a bunch of spells and rituals. That's just what they are. If you've ever read a translation of them, you're going to know that just out of the gate. They aren't narratives about ancient Egypt's early history, whether it's real or mythical history. And since the Osiris legend of later texts links that story to the afterlife and the divine reincarnation of Horus, the son of Osiris, as pharaoh, the pyramid text rituals allude to parts of the legend, but they don't tell it. Again, they're not narrative. They don't spell it out. Lengthier sources, however, do, but they are all later. For instance, the contendings of Horus and Seth, which is the 20th dynasty, the reign of Ramses V, roughly 1189 to 1077 BC. There's also something called the Great Hymn to Osiris, which is from the 18th dynasty, 1550 to 1292 BC. And then much later than that, the writings of Plutarch from 46 to 119 AD. These are our primary sources for the Osiris legend. This brings us to our third question. What's the Osiris legend about? What are the details? I'm just going to give you a summary of the retelling of the myth that is from the UCLA Online Encyclopedia of Egyptology under the title Osiris and the Deceased. Now, according to the legend, the god Osiris was born in Thebes on the 361st day of the year. We'll come back to that in a moment. He married his younger sister Isis, with whom he had a sexual relationship while both were still in their mother's womb. Osiris was then crowned king of Egypt, and at the age of 28, Osiris was murdered by his brother Seth. The motive differs in sources. There's self-defense, possibly, revenge for Osiris having an affair with Seth's wife, Nephthys, again, another possible motivation. The end result, though, is that Osiris's body was cut into pieces and scattered throughout Egypt. His wife Isis searched for and discovered the pieces of his corpse, and she reassembled his body through mummification. Some sources exclude the penis, for which Isis made a new one. Others have all the pieces. It just depends which version of the story you look at. Using her divine power, again, she was a deity, and some spells, she aroused Osiris long enough to have sex with him. The result of that sexual encounter was a child, the child Horus. The child Horus was raised in secret by his mother, Isis, so that Seth could not find and kill him, for he was the rightful heir to Egypt's rule. On reaching adulthood, Horus avenged the crime committed against Osiris, and Seth was brought to justice and punished. Horus was acclaimed as king and rightful successor to his father Osiris. And Osiris himself, again the key figure of our episode, was then installed as ruler of the Underworld, the realm of the dead, and its inhabitants. We have one more question to ask. So this is our fourth and final question. How does the Osiris legend parallel the New Testament portrayal of Jesus? Well, the answer to this one is pretty short. It doesn't. Jesus isn't a Christian version of Osiris, and frankly, it's not even close. The disconnections between the Osiris legend and the Jesus of Christianity are immediately apparent and obvious to anyone familiar with the New Testament gospel accounts of Jesus. First and foremost, Osiris does not rise from the dead back into the world of the living, as the New Testament accounts clearly testify of Jesus. All you need to do is go read passages like Matthew 28, 1-5, or Mark 16, 1-8, Luke 24, 1-49, or John 20, 1-29. All four Gospels have the same story about Jesus rising from the dead back into the world of people, world of the living human beings, not the underworld, the gloomy underworld like Osiris is. As one mainstream scholar of ancient Near Eastern religions, Mark S. Smith, notes, quote, "Problems attend comparisons of Osiris and other figures. Osiris does not undergo any return to life, nor does Osiris return from the underworld. Instead, he journeys to the netherworld where he becomes king." Unquote. Another mainstream religion scholar, J.Z. Smith, is even more pointed, more direct in his assessment. Quote, "Osiris did not return to his former mode of existence, but rather journeyed to the underworld, where he became the powerful lord of the dead. In no sense can Osiris be said to have risen in the sense required by the dying and rising pattern. Most certainly, it was never conceived as an annual event. Osiris is a powerful god of the potent dead. In no sense can the dramatic myth of his death and reanimation be harmonized to the pattern of dying and rising gods." Unquote. Even the birth of Osiris, which matches December 25th on our calendar, is not an alignment to the Jesus story, for a simple reason. The New Testament never has Jesus born on December 25th. That's a tradition that arose several centuries after the writing of the New Testament. It's actually a date derived from the early church's effort to date Easter, the resurrection. That was the most important day. And then they just sort of did the math in reverse. But even in ancient times, there was disagreement about that. And for the first few centuries, nobody cared. There is no December 25th correlation with Osiris. Thanks for watching this episode of Fringe Pop 321. Please watch the rest of the episodes in this series, and don't forget to visit our website, fp321.com, because what you know may not be so.